Before we learn how to shuck oysters, we need to know the parts of the oyster first. So let me show you. This is an oyster. We have two shells, the top shell and the bottom shell. And the bottom shell is also called a cup because it holds the oyster meat and the oyster liquor. The pointed end of the two shells is also known as the hinge, and that is the point in which we will be opening up oysters. Now, the first step in shucking oysters is to clean them. Clean the oysters under cold running water and give them a bit of a scrub to remove any sand or debris and then pat them dry. Since we will be using sharp utensils, it is important to protect your hand while you're shucking an oyster. To do that, I like to fold a cloth napkin in four and then place them on the palm of my hand so that it provides padded protection and a good grip while you shuck the oyster. Insert the pointy end of the oyster knife into the hinge of the oyster and just wiggle it in a little bit to find a weak spot in which you can insert the pointy end and lift up the oyster at the same time. While holding the oyster in one hand, rock the shucking knife back and forth, pushing it in through the hinge towards the inside of the oyster. You should feel and hear the oyster shell pop open and separate. The oyster meat is actually connecting both the top and the bottom shells with an adductor muscle. To separate this, place the oyster shucking knife horizontally between the two oyster shells, and then with a gentle rocking motion, separate those two shells even further and move the shucking knife right through the oyster as close to the top shell as possible to cut that adductor muscle off the top shell. Since the oyster meat is still connected to the bottom shell with the adductor muscle, we need to cut that as well. Just use the oyster knife and pass the blade through the bottom shell as close to the shell as possible to sever that adductor muscle from the bottom shell. To make sure that the oyster meat is completely separated from the cup, just give the shell a little shake and the oyster should float in the liquor and jiggle inside the cup like this. If you don't have an oyster shucking knife, don't worry. I'm going to show you how to separate the oyster shell or shuck an oyster with a screwdriver and a paring knife. Let's start by inserting a flathead screwdriver into the hinge, and then with firm, controlled pressure, push in the screwdriver while rocking it back and forth to separate and pop open the two oyster shells. Using the screwdriver, pry open the shell wide enough to be able to insert a paring knife between the oyster shells. Then insert the paring knife between the top and bottom shells horizontally, and in the same way as the shucking knife, rock it back and forth while moving the knife right through the oyster. Move the paring knife as close to the top shell as possible to cut the adductor muscle cleanly to separate the oyster and the top shell. Then to separate the oyster from the bottom shell, we're going to use the same paring knife and cut the adductor muscle as close to the bottom shell as possible, and then we should have a nice jiggly oyster that is floating in the oyster liquor that is ready to be eaten. And there you have it. Now you know how to shuck oysters, and there are so many ways that you can enjoy oysters as well. If you like cooking and baking 101 videos and recipes, don't forget to follow me, and I'll see you next time.